All right. Today's guest is John Mackey, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but John is the co-founder and former CEO of Whole Foods Market, which he built from a single Austin store into a global company. He co-founded the Conscious Capitalism Movement and continues his work in mission-driven enterprise through Love.Life. His latest book is The Whole Story, Adventures in Love, Life, and Capitalism. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve to kind of give some more intro.
Thanks, Rigel. And thanks very much for joining us tonight, John. Really appreciate you being a guest speaker in our group. I know that the folks here are interested to just hear briefly about our road together. We've been friends and colleagues since 2012, so I want to just briefly recount that story. I first met John, our mutual neighbor here in Boulder. John has a house around the corner from me and Jeff. He sent me an email and said, "Dear Mr. McIntosh, I have appreciated your book, Integral Consciousness," and he provided a couple of block quotes from the book in the book Conscious Capitalism, which came out in 2013, a few months later, and suggested that we get together. And of course, I was thrilled to hear from John and very much appreciated his attention to my work in Conscious Capitalism, which is still a really best-selling book. And then we met face-to-face for the first time in 2013 at Esalen, where Carter Phipps and I were invited to attend an Esalen special conclave where we talked about conscious capitalism. We had many distinguished luminaries who were part of that. And then since then, we've had a lot of really great times together. John introduced me to ultralight backpacking. I had been a backpacker, wilderness traveler since I was a teenager. But as my body got older and I had a trick ankle, I couldn't really do it anymore. And John showed me all the tricks for this ultralight version of the sport. And I got kitted out. And then since then, we've done hundreds of miles on the Pacific Crest Trail together, many excellent trips. And so that wilderness experience has been wonderful. It was also shortly after we met that John agreed to become a director and supporter of what was at the beginning known as the Institute for Cultural Evolution. Now it's the Institute for Developmental Philosophy, and John has been really a co-founding director of that organization for coming on 13 years now. And then beginning in 2016, we hit upon the idea. John and Carter and I decided that we would co-author a book together, which became Conscious Leadership. In some ways a sequel to Conscious Capitalism. And the process of writing the book was edifying, and I'm really proud of it. And that book is still out there. I can point people to it. A lot of great information on leadership and business in there. And we were able to communicate kind of an integral philosophy of business, which John will talk about here, which really that's what conscious capitalism is. And we've traveled together in Europe, and again, he lives for the summer at least here in Boulder, around the corner, and we often still go hiking together. And so I'm just really grateful to your friendship and support, John, and I really admire all the excellent things you've done in your life.
Well, thank you, Steve. Steve's one of my intellectual heroes, and I've learned a lot from him over the years, and my vocabulary's increased a lot too. Steve uses lots of words that no one else uses, so he's a mentor in that regard.
All right. Well, let me focus on the first question here. Let me first say one more thing, and that is, among the thought leaders and proponents of integral thinking, John is arguably one of the top current influential proponents of integral philosophy. He recently gave a TED talk that's had 300,000 views, and then about a year ago he spoke at the Alliance for Responsible Citizens in London, and that YouTube video has like 170,000 views. So he's really getting some excellent traction in his advocacy of conscious capitalism and positive lifestyle and integral thinking. So I want everybody to know the great work that he's doing now, not just the stuff that he's done in the past. The first thing I want you to speak on, John, is a particularly integral blog post that you posted a while back on johnpmackey.com, where you penned an essay. It was entitled "Recent Thoughts on Conscious Capitalism."
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about how conscious capitalism itself is an integral approach to business, because even in the name, it kind of integrates both modernist capitalism with postmodern critiques, making it conscious. And in that blog post, you outlined the worldviews and talked about stakeholder integration and just your thoughts about how integral thinking impacts business and how it's impacted your business journey. If you could say a few words about that, I'd be grateful.
Well, sure. I think I wrote that blog post because one of my fears since I co-founded Conscious Capitalism is that it was going to be hijacked by sort of the postmodern green perspective, and to a large extent it has been. I'd say it's been weaponized by the left as a critique of capitalism, and as that stakeholder philosophy has been egalitarianized in the sense that, I always like to say all stakeholders matter, but they're not all equally important to an organization or a business. And the idea that companies, the board of directors should be taken over by stakeholder representatives is very, very not consistent with conscious capitalism as we founded it, as when we created it. So, conscious capitalism is basically, when I explain it to, there are two types of people that criticize conscious capitalism. One is traditional capitalists who see no reason for capitalism to have a modifier at all. It's what's the point of, they're suspicious if you're modifying it with conscious, there must be some other agenda that you're trying to destroy capitalism. And the other criticism is that conscious capitalism is inherently evil, and putting a modifier on it like conscious, is putting lipstick on a pig, and you can't salvage capitalism. It needs to be replaced. So those are the two perspectives that generally attack and criticize conscious capitalism. And I wrote that particular essay to try to make clear that, at least from my perspective, conscious capitalism was not anti-capitalism. It's not what it is. It's when I've explained it in detail to people that are more traditional capitalists, oftentimes they say something like, "Well, John, that's just capitalism. I don't understand. That's just capitalism." And I said, "Yes, exactly. Conscious capitalism is capitalism rightly understood." But it's the capitalism, you might say, got hijacked intellectually by the belief that business's purpose is to maximize shareholder value. And that took business and capitalism down a very narrow track, which is not, if you study the history of capitalism, you'll see that that's not the track it's mostly been on. And it's like Ed Freeman likes to say, he's kind of the father of stakeholder theory, and a pretty good friend of mine. He would say that our bodies have to produce red blood cells or they'll die, right? It doesn't follow logically that the purpose of our lives is to produce red blood cells. Business is similar. It has to make money or it dies. It has to make profits. But it doesn't follow that's why it exists, to make profits. Ultimately, business's purpose is to create value for all the stakeholders, but primarily the customers. That's why it exists, to create value for customers. Now, customers may want things that you may think are not good. Many of the critics of business are always criticizing business because it produces things that they don't approve of. But business doesn't exist. It exists in the marketplace to basically give people what they want, even if what they want is not necessarily good for them. Think tobacco companies or junk food companies or things that are producing products that you may not personally consume and don't really approve of. And so capitalism has been misunderstood because it's judged oftentimes also by its worst practitioners, the people that they're bad apples. There are, there's bad people. There's mafioso type people in business that use force and coercion. But what people don't understand is that, of course, bad apples and bad actors are in every line of business. We have bad actors in government. We have bad actors in medicine. We have bad actors in the legal system, bad teachers. I mean, that business is not, it's human nature shines forth in business as it does everywhere else. But oftentimes I feel like business is judged by its worst actors rather than its best. And the point I'm making is that I think capitalism, conscious capitalism, is rightly understood capitalism in its most historical context, which, if you study it historically, it tended to have this higher purpose to it. It tended to care about stakeholders, not just the shareholders. But it got hijacked by certain modernistic ideology that narrowed it down. And so conscious capitalism is reawakening people to the fact that business can have a higher purpose besides just making money, that it creates value not just for its shareholders, but for all of its major stakeholders, its customers, its employees, its suppliers, its communities that are part of. All the nonprofit donations ultimately come from business. All taxes ultimately come from business. Business is the source, and the capitalism is the source that's lifted humanity out of. It's astounding what's happened in the last 250 years. It's unprecedented in human history. It's when capitalism was created and unleashed. So it's a defense of capitalism, but also I'm trying to keep it from being hijacked by, we'll call it, an unhealthy postmodern consciousness, which is fundamentally anti-capitalist. And I've been fighting it the entire time because conscious capitalism attracts people that believe they're more conscious, but in fact, they're very anti-capitalist. They're more socialist, more Marxist, concerned with equality, equal outcomes, equity. Capitalism does create wealth. And then some people have a zero-sum mentality that, well, if Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk have so much wealth, then they must have taken really big pieces of the pie, and that left smaller pieces for everyone else, and that's not really fair. But that's a misunderstanding of the way capitalism actually works, was it's this incredible win-win-win positive sum game where prosperity is not trickling down. Prosperity is continually spreading to all the different stakeholders. They're all winning. They're all gaining. I'm not even neutral about it. Capitalism is the greatest thing humanity's ever collectively done. And that I'm happy to debate anyone on that topic. However, it's good, but we can make it better by making it more conscious, by understanding the interrelationships that exist between the stakeholders and finding strategies where all the stakeholders are simultaneously winning, that everyone can be gaining and winning and prospering from it. And that's what conscious capitalism is really about. And my main concern hasn't been the traditional capitalist. It's been more about the well-intended sort of postmodernists that truly don't like capitalism and see conscious capitalism as a way to hijack it for their own agenda. That's what I've tried to resist.
Well, let me just say that I've been thoroughly inspired by conscious capitalism. One of the things that has really influenced my work in philosophy has been the power of higher purpose. Understanding that if people are doing things that are creating economic value, that behind that is some intrinsic value, some goodness, truth, or beauty, or combination thereof. and that this actually is how people can find self-actualization. I mean, not that necessarily all self-actualization can come from what you do for a living, but for many people, especially entrepreneurs, this is an expression of a higher purpose that is truly noble. And one of the things I really liked about that blog post is you said, look, business is rough. It's some, people assume that it's just a kind of a gravy train, but for most entrepreneurs trying to make all the ends meet, trying to keep their head above water, it's not easy, and there's intense competition, and that's in some ways what helps create the value. But what I really loved that you said, that you kind of really emphasized, was that capitalism's a human institution like any human institution, like you said, and that ultimately it's the integrity and dare I say, virtue of the people involved, or lack thereof, that are going to make it good or bad. I wanted to pull out one quote from that blog post that I thought was particularly well said, and that is, restoring trust in capitalism requires purpose-driven leadership, leaders who consciously act with integrity and lead with love. And so that's such a great message, and I was really happy that we were able to get that across in a pretty powerful way in conscious leadership.
Yeah, one of the things I found most interesting, as we did Whole Foods, is when we were an up-and-comer, the media loved us. But when we became really successful and larger, we were the same company doing good things in the world, but we became slowly hated and attacked. And one of the things that I always found interesting is that Whole Foods did such amazing things, not just in terms of the business, but we did so many amazing things with philanthropy. I'm so proud of the foundations we created. One of them was called, now they've just gone to after I left, retired, they switched them all over to just under Whole Foods Market Foundations. But we had 3 distinct foundations, and they all did amazing work in the world. My favorite story is about the Whole Planet Foundation. I was so inspired by Muhammad Yunus and microcredit as one of the solutions to abject poverty around the world, that Whole Foods went into partnership with them. And we began to create microcredit loans all around the world, wherever Whole Foods Market was trading. So we were buying things from all around the world, and we started opening microcredit institutions in Guatemala and Costa Rica and India and everywhere, all through Africa, every place we were getting produce and things from. And we helped literally millions and millions and millions of people escape from abject poverty. I never once could get the media to ever say anything about it, because it just contradicted that view of business as fundamentally selfish and greedy. And so that was like the best kept secret, what philanthropy was doing. And so as Whole Foods got more successful, then the philanthropy that we could do grew. And so the foundation's impact, another one's Whole Kids. Little known fact, Whole Foods gives free salad bar, a free garden, or free pollinating beehives to any school anywhere in the United States, Canada, or the UK, places we have stores. And we've given away, 15,000 salad bars, maybe 15 or 20,000 gardens, and pollinators a little behind to that. But and then we do education to teachers and whatnot about nutrition. So we were getting salad bars and gardens in thousands and thousands of schools, and yet nobody ever would write about it. It contradicted the main narrative, you might say.
Okay, next, I'd like to ask you about another one of your blog posts. This is from July 2025 on johnpmackey.com. And this one was entitled, "The Missing Pillars of Health, Emotional and Spiritual Well-Being." And you talked about some of your spiritual practices and how your full-time focus on, or expanded focus on health now, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, how that is infused with spirituality, really.
I think, also full disclosure, I've been a longtime student of A Course in Miracles. So that's been my primary spiritual path. But I've done I tell the story, the prologue of my book, the whole story is when I experienced the ego death on LSD when I was 20 I just turned 22 or 23 way back in the day. And that had this massive impact on me that led me to move into this vegetarian co-op. I became a vegetarian, had my food awakening, you might say, about healthy, natural, and organic foods. And that led me to co-found Whole Foods with my girlfriend that I met at the co-op I was living in, the vegetarian community. And so that became a driving thing I did. And then when I also had an awakening back in 1984, when I did MDMA for the first time, while it was still legal, and I also got into breath work at that time. So and then I finished in this book. I tell the story when I did guided spiritual journeys, inspired by Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind. I thought, yeah, I was transitioning out of Whole Foods. I thought this would be a good time to be a guided spiritual journey. That was 5-day retreat with psilocybin and MDMA and breath work. I found breath work to be incredibly powerful spiritual accelerant. So now that I've transitioned out of that and started a new business up, but I've gotten much deeper into my own spiritual path. I've really kind of really going for it now. And the Course in Miracles is a path of awakening to love. It's basically mostly through practicing forgiveness of everyone, everything in the world, and yourself, and letting go and removing the blocks to the presence of love. So I've been on that. I've been on that path for a long time, but I'd say it's really accelerated for me the last 2 to 3 years, and it's continuing to accelerate. So that's becoming what I'm most interested in now, is that, and how deep I can go, and how much I can awaken to this, to love. And when Steve mentioned about if you listen to my TED talk, it's only 10 minutes, so it's not a big lift. But in those 10 minutes, I tell stories about how win-win-win philosophy worked well in my life and in business as well. And I tell the final story I tell is a story when I'm telling to my wife about the TED talk. I'm going to do this TED talk on win-win-win. I explain all the things I'm going to talk about. And she tells me, she says, well, John, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. And I said, win-win-win, that's not that complicated. It's pretty simple. He says, I know something that's simpler. And I said, what's that? And he said, John, just love everyone all the time, no exceptions. That is how I finished the TED Talk, because she's right. That is the ultimate win-win-win philosophy. So obviously, I think emotional and spiritual health are extremely important. I think those are as important or more important than physical health. They're not really separate. They're all tied together. And oftentimes, our physical health comes from having unhealthy emotions and mental attitudes that affect our bodies and harm us in negative ways. So the vision of Love.Life, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later, is to try to help everyone to become more conscious about their health, mental, emotional, spiritual, and of course physical, and then help people to become the healthiest version of themselves. So it's a dream I've had for a long time, and that's probably what I'll be doing work-wise for the rest of my life.
Well, I can say, as your friend, we've really noticed that when you started to do those retreats you mentioned, how you were just glowing. I mean, you had a different vibrational being that was contagious. It was like a contact high being with you, especially right after you'd finished those. And so, I can attest that you're on the path and doing good work.
This is not going to come as a surprise to you, Steve, or anybody else, because it's kind of a truism. The funny thing is that I continue to experience the world as kind of a mirror. The more I love other people, the more they give it back to me. I mean, that seems sort of obvious, but I don't know. Most of us don't. So often in my life, I was putting out judgments and putting people down and, being in a competitive mindset with everyone. And I got that back. So I can tell you, being kind and compassionate and loving and caring and forgiving, it's got real world payoffs in the present. So, yeah, I recommend it.
Excellent. Well, okay, so related to especially the the psychedelic experience you described, together with the breath, with the altered states that you've pursued as a kind of spiritual practice. In my own work, I've talked about the connection, at least in my own life, between psychedelic experience and wilderness experience, an immersive, where you're sleeping and traveling through the wilderness for days at a time, as we've done together, and as I know you've done really for many, many years. Perhaps you could just say a little bit about your wilderness travels and how those have contributed to your growth.
Yeah, well, back in my life changed, as many people can attest to. Probably some of you had your lives change on 911. I happened to be in New York on 911, going down to, not to the Twin Towers, but I was going to Wall Street nearby. And I could have been in the Twin Towers because I'd been there many times for various other meetings. We were going to meet with the bond rating agencies on Whole Foods Market's corporate debt, because the interest rates that you pay are very much influenced by your bond rating. And so you want to meet with the bond rating agencies and talk about what you're doing, and hopefully they'll give you a better bond rating. So we're heading down there that day, and the radio's on, and we hear about the first tower being hit by an airplane, a jet. And our driver, who was an older guy, he said, that happened once before. The Empire State Building had a plane ran into the Empire State Building. So we kind of thought, okay, I guess accidents happen. But then when the second jet happened, we were very close to the World Trade Center. When that second jet hit it, we heard the explosion. The car stopped. I got out of the car, and we had all this debris raining on our car. And I could see both of the Twin Towers burning. And so it was like, this can't be a coincidence. I immediately thought, we're under a terrorist attack. And then the next thing I thought is, Manhattan's an island. They're going to shut this island down. We got to get off the island. The airports are probably already getting closed down. I told the driver, we're canceling our meetings. Take us to the train station. I want to catch a train out of Manhattan. I think we caught the last train out. We only got as far as Philadelphia. And then the train system got shut down. That was it for that. We rented a car and we drove back, my chief financial officer, and we drove back to Austin together. And on the way back, we're going through the Appalachians. And I had this flashback to when I was just a kid, and we were on an East Coast trip someplace. And this guy emerges from the woods with a big giant backpack and a long beard. And I asked my father, I was probably 8 or 9 years old. I said, Daddy, who's that man? Why is he carrying that big pack? And he said, John, I think he's hiking the Appalachian Trail, because this is where the Appalachian Trail crosses the road. And I thought to myself, wow, I'd like to do that someday, because my dad told me this pathway goes all the way from Georgia to Maine. And I said, there's a hiking trail all the way from Georgia to Maine? God, how cool is that? That's what I thought as a little boy. And so now I'm driving through it. I'd had kind of, a little bit of a shaken up near-death experience in New York. And I thought, all am I going to do in my life is Whole Foods Market? Working my ass off for 25 years at that point. And I thought, I'm going to do some other shit before I get too old. And then I hatched the idea I would hike the Appalachian Trail. I'm take a sabbatical and do it. So I did. And then I started learning about ultralight hiking, which was just sort of in its birthplace at that time. And that led me down the rabbit hole. And now I actually I own an ultralight gear company, or at least I'm part of one. And I've been doing it ever since. I love hiking. I love communing in nature. Although my wife accuses me, not completely incorrectly, she said, John, the real reasons you go backpacking is you want an excuse to eat vegan junk food, which you can't rationalize in your ordinary life, but you can when you're hiking because you need all these calories. And secondly, you just want to listen to books, because you listen to books several hours a day. And by the time you finish the hike, you've listened to, half a dozen books. And I sort of plead guilty to both of those accusations, but there is more to it than that. I love being out in nature. I love the feeling you get from hiking 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and your body is getting fitter and stronger and healthier, and your vitality is going up a few notches. I mean, you get tired, your body recovers and it comes back stronger. So, and nature's beautiful. I love being in these beautiful scenic spots, and they're all over the world. My God, once you get into backpacking, the entire world is open to you, and it's astounding how much beauty there is on this planet. I want to immerse myself in it as much as I can while I still can hike, because I'm not getting any younger. There will come a time when, well, just this summer, I actually fell hiking the Colorado Trail and broke my neck. I fractured my C7. So that knocked me out for just a little bit, but I'm back and a little wiser, a little more careful, at least when I get back on the Colorado Trail. But I'll get back on the trail that threw me, so to speak.
Excellent. Okay, now I want to turn to something that I've had, some personal experience in terms of an aha moment, and that is this philosophy of win-win-win. Not just win-win, but win-win, maybe multiple wins beyond that. And when we were writing Conscious Leadership together with Carter, this was something that I didn't quite understand. In other words, there's a kind of a magic to it. And after I worked with it a while, I could see, wow, that really works. In other words, it's natural to say, okay, what are the trade-offs? What are the compromises? And you feel like you got to be realistic. Everybody's got to do that to some extent. But if you approach a situation instead of with the compromise mindset, if you approach it with a win-win-win mindset, amazing things can and do happen.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if you can talk about the mechanics of that or the approach to that as you did in your TED Talk.
Yeah. The first thing to understand is the framework most people have is a win-lose framework. That's how we interpret the world. Think about every game that we play, right? That's a win-lose. Every sport we play, win-lose. There's only one Super Bowl champion. Everybody else lost. The Patriot fans right now are nursing their wounds, even though they had a tremendous season, but they lost. That's the way many people think life is. There's winners and there's losers. And it's this very zero-sum mentality. But that's not really the way the universe works. That's an oversimplification of the fundamental reality about business, for example, is it's not a win-lose game. People think about their competitors, but what they're not thinking about is all the people that they're cooperating with, creating win-win value with. Your customers don't have to trade with you. They have alternatives in the marketplace. If they are trading with you, it's because they want to, because they think they're winning in this trade. Same thing with people that work for you, employees. They have other opportunities in the marketplace. They don't have to work for you. And better jobs come around all the time and they take them. So they're working with you for a while because it's in their best interest and they feel like they're winning. You're winning because you're employing them and you feel like they're worth the money that you're paying them. And you're trading with your customers because you feel like you're selling stuff at a good price and you're earning money doing so. Same thing with your suppliers. They don't need to trade with you. They have other alternatives in the marketplace. They trade with you for mutual gain. The communities that you live in, that you're constantly exchanging with, that you're paying taxes to, you're making donations to, you're involved in your neighborhoods, your groups, your communities. We're a community right now, right? We're all here because we want to be. And if I'm too boring, you can certainly hit the disengage button and you're here because, you think you're winning. So the win-win-win philosophy is just recognizing and looking for positive sums so that I win and you win and the larger community wins. And what I've discovered is that if you start to think through that framework, if you give your mind permission to not think in terms of trade-offs and what you're losing or what somebody else is losing, but if you look for the synergies, if you look for the positive sums and you look for positive win-win-win solutions, you will find them. It's like the mind is so limitlessly creative. If we direct it to find win-win-win solutions to any problem, they're there. We just don't look for them. What's that old story about guys looking for he's lost his keys and he's under this lamppost looking for it, but he can't find it. And he's only looking there because that's where the light is shining, but the key is in the dark over there. Well, win-win-win is in the dark, but you can find it if you look for it and you give your mind, your brain permission to search out for these win-win-wins. And so if you can't find them, it's just kind of a failure of imagination, a failure of creativity, because they're almost always there. And you can get really skilled at finding them once your mind is unleashed and permitted to look for those solutions. So it's pretty transformative. And you have to let go of that win-lose philosophy. We're brainwashed in it. Honestly, we grew up with it. We've been taught that we're competing with everybody, and only some people are going to win and some people are going to lose. There's scarcity out there. And that framework really limits the potential of happiness in life, in my experience personally, and for many other people I've seen. So I encourage you to begin to try to work with the win-win-win framework, and you'll find it's transformative.
Right on. Well, thanks for that. And of course, in both conscious capitalism and conscious leadership, that whole approach is detailed with even greater specificity. So I can invite people to look into that if that's something that interests them. Now I want to ask you about your latest.
Wait, somebody has in the script. What's the win-win-win with Putin? I haven't really thought about that, but that's a good challenge for you. There probably is a win-win-win out there with Putin. It's not necessarily a place I'm particularly interested in myself, but if you're interested in it, this might be a good way to think about it and keep asking that question. When I was trying to decide what to do when Whole Foods had shareholder activists trying to take over our company, every day I focused on that question. What's the win-win-win? What's the win-win-win solution? If you focus on it, keep asking that question and direct your intentionality there, you will find answers emerge. In Whole Foods' case, the win-win-win was selling to Amazon rather than having the shareholder activists take over the company and dismantle it. So that's a whole nother discussion sometime else to talk about how that was a win-win-win.
And part of it could just be reframing, like instead of the win for Putin, what's the win for the Russian people, right? That is the solution to Ukraine that also benefits those folks as well, because they've had a hard time about it as well. Anyway, I now want to focus on what I really think is in some ways an even more visionary business than Whole Foods Market, which of course transformed the way people eat in America and much of the developed world. And that is Love.Life. I'd love you to tell the story of that. But specifically, I'm interested in some of the remarks you made with your interview with, I think it was Dr. Mark Hyman, where he asked you about it. And the story included what you called notes from God, how you had this idea in the 80s and you kept getting little messages that eventually led you to embark on this great adventure of creating this next business, Love.Life. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, before I start that, I'll just talk about, I'm a great believer in Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. I actually believe most of us, if not all of us, are called to a hero's journey in our life. And yet fear short circuits that calling. We have a fear of our parents, displeasing our parents, or we have a fear of failure, or we have a fear of being ridiculed or laughed at, or we have a fear of, sometimes we have a fear of success. We don't know how we can't see ourselves being successful because we don't feel like we deserve it. But I found that the people that I feel like are most fulfilled in life are those that do answer that call. And that call is within the heart, right? It's in our inner being. It's within the soul. And so I have felt that call. That led me to move into the co-op, and I had that awakening. And I've been following that little voice, the inner voice, whatever we want to call that, higher self. I've been trying to follow that as best I can. And so Love.Life really starts way, way back in the day when I told you I did the MDMA for the first time, and I got into breath work, and I realized love was the most important thing in the universe. Love is, when we get to our deathbeds, I guarantee you, not one of us here is going to be thinking about, I wish I'd worked harder. I wish I had made more money. I wish. You'll have some regrets, but I promise you the regrets will almost probably all be about relationships. I wish I told my father how I really felt about him before he passed on, or I wish I'd spent more time with my children when they were growing up, and it'll be about relationships, because it'll be about love, because that is really what matters in life, is love. And so back in the day, when I'm doing all this, then I decided I was going to make Whole Foods. I was going to base the company on love. And I tell the story about how one of my co-founders he started calling me Wacky Mackey behind my back, and sometimes not behind my back, because he just thought I'd gone off the deep end, and I was trying to create this company based on love, and he thought that was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. It's hard enough to make money. We can't have this new age bullshit. And he ended up leaving the company, selling his stock for a couple of $100,000. And I promise you that was a very bad economic decision on his part. But I wish Mark well in all ways. I haven't had contact with him for many years now. But I also wanted to start a holistic health center back in 1985. It was going to be called LifeWorks, and it was going to have, we were going to do it next to a Whole Foods market that we were opening up, next to this consciousness bookstore, and it was going to have meditation, it was going to have breath work, it was going to have yoga, and it was going to be it was going to be a few thousand square feet, but we were really excited about it. And it didn't happen because sort of the woman that was kind of the leader of our spiritual little tribe that we were forming, she decided she wasn't going to put any money in, so it was all going to fall on me. And I thought, I'm not going to, I don't want to be the only one taking the risk here. So we all need to take a risk. And so I didn't do it. So I didn't even think about that as I started to do Love.Life. And I'll tell you the origins of that in just a second. But the woman's name was Jackie Small. And when Jackie heard about Love.Life, she said, "Thank God John's finally getting around to doing LifeWorks." but it was almost 40 years later, right? Almost 40 years later. So the dream was there early, and now a more mature version of what we had was going to be created there. And so I tell the story that at Whole Foods Market, we were self-insured, and in our health insurance, we were self-insured, which meant we had a administrator, United Health or Aetna, that would be paying the bills, but we supplied all the money to pay everything. And that's almost all big corporations are self-insured. That's a little known fact. And what we did, we discovered that 10% of our employees, our team members, spent 90% of our healthcare dollars. So we realized, wow, if we could get those 10% healthier, that'd be a win-win-win, right? It'd be good for them. They'd be healthier. It'd be good for the company. We'd be spending less money on their healthcare. And it'd be good for the society as a whole, because people be healthier, and it'd be good for their families, and everybody ripple down all through it. So we started something called Total Health Immersion, where we would we'd invite, anybody could apply at Whole Foods, but we invited those who had health issues, who were obese or had type 2 diabetes or autoimmune diseases, in some cases heart disease, or had strokes, to come and do this. And for that week, we would control their food. Diet is an underrated fact. It's very determinant of overall health over a long period of time. We took control of their diet, and we did intensive education. We got everybody exercising. We created a little community for a week. We had medically supervised. We took everybody's blood pressure. We took their cholesterol readings. We weighed them. We got all their biometrics, so to speak, right when they come in. And then a week later, when they were going out, we'd measure it again. And it was such a wake-up call to see what can happen in just a week. People that were type 2 diabetic, many times they got off their meds in just a week or less. It was astounding, all medically supervised, because their blood sugar would plummet so much that we'd have to take them off the meds as their diet. They started eating really a healthy diet. Same thing with people losing weight. Their blood pressure oftentimes dropped 20 or 30 points in that week. And it was like such a wake-up call for me, because my own health journey had been sort of a gradual thing over many years. So I was shocked to find how quickly people could. The human body is actually very resilient. If we stop poisoning it, it begins to recover and heal itself. It's astounding. And so when I decided to leave foods, that little voice came back and said, yeah, I could go lie on a beach or do whatever I want the rest of my life, but I feel like I know how to help maybe thousands of people, maybe even over a long period of time, millions of people live a much healthier life and live longer. And that was the germination of creating Love.Life. So our first one's opened up. First one, by the way, could have been in Boulder, but it's a longer story. We couldn't come to terms with the place we wanted to do it. And so we opened the first one in Los Angeles. And as I always joke, if this won't work in LA, it won't work anywhere. Because LA has always been, one of the leaders in sort of health consciousness, being in the kind of people want to be beautiful and they want to be fit and they want to look great. And they want to do that everywhere, but it's particularly prevalent in LA. Plus, the location that we got was an old Best Buy, and it was located next to Whole Foods Market's third highest volume store in Southern California, third out of about 60. So it was like, this is a great location. So we opened it up. It's big. It's 45,000 square feet. It's got a very healthy restaurant, which won't probably surprise anybody. It's got a really state-of-the-art gym and fitness center. It's got physical therapy. It's got a yoga studio. It's got Pilates studio. It's got a spa, a very nice spa. We do classes and community gatherings and special events and lectures. We have 3 indoor pickleball courts for play. And we also have a primary medical center there. And so the vision of Love.Life is quite simple. People, you don't have to be a medical member. So many people just go there. We have all this recovery stuff too, all this biohacking, from cryotherapy to infrared saunas to red light therapy to PEMF machines to hyperbaric oxygen to cold plunges to steam sauna, everything that's kind of associated oftentimes with wellness. Plus, we're getting new stuff all the time as we stay on the cutting edge, so to speak. But we also have primary healthcare. So the idea being, what's broken with our healthcare system in America, everybody's obsessed with who pays for it. But the bigger problem is the paradigm, which is we have what I call a plumber's model of healthcare. When do you hire a plumber? When you need one, when your pipes break or your toilet's overflowing. So you got to bring a plumber in when it's broken. That's generally how people see medical care. You hire a doctor when something's broken. And the problem today is that was pretty good philosophy for a long time, because when we were dying from cholera and tuberculosis and all kinds of infectious diseases, and we didn't have good sanitation, we didn't have vaccinations, we did not have antibiotics. But now what kills people are dietary lifestyle diseases. We die of heart attacks, which is a dietary disease for the most part. Cancer, lifestyle and dietary, very, very important determinants. So I say genetics are about 20% and diet and lifestyle is about 80%. Obesity, 74% of Americans are overweight, 43% are obese. We spend more money per capita in total for healthcare than any other country in the world. It's not even close. And yet we only rank 48th in longevity. Think about that. America is remarkably not very healthy. And so our philosophy is, we now have these amazing, we can test people. We can find out how healthy you are very quickly. We can find out, and we can give you a grade on how healthy your heart and circulatory system is. We can give you a grade on your gut health. We can give you a grade on your metabolic health. We can give you a grade on your brain health. We can check your fitness levels for your mobility, your strength, your flexibility, your balance, your aerobic capacity. All of this stuff is measurable and quantifiable. We can determine and can give you your biological age and compare it to your chronological age. We can tell you that you're probably going to live to this age, and you'll probably have a health span that lasts this long. This is based on the data that we can get today, integrated with AI. But here's the kicker. We can also help you live longer, and we can help you reverse these diseases if they're not too advanced. We can help you extend your health span. This is the potential. This is the new paradigm for wellness and health, is that we have far more power to be healthy and to be vital and to eliminate toxins from our system. And gradually, just like we talk about consciousness development, well, part of consciousness development is discovering how to be as healthy as possible and to live as long in good health as possible. I always ask people, who here would like to live to be 100? And most people don't raise their hands because they assume if you're going to be 100, you're going to have Alzheimer's or dementia. You're going to be decrepit. You're not going to be able to have mobility. It's not going to be very enjoyable. But then if you rephrase the question, how many people would like to be 100 if you're sound mind and you have full mobility and you are still able to do all the things or almost everything that you love to do? And the answer is everybody would like to do that. So that's kind of the Love.Life vision. Also, AI is going to be transformative. It already is. And we're accelerating our knowledge about how to be healthier. It's things like peptides are now on the cutting edge for being able to accelerate nerve regeneration, stem cells. These are all things. It's a wonderful time to be involved, in my opinion, in this wellness revolution. And so I'm doing something I'm passionate about again. I'm back in startup mode. I'm having fun again. It's a lot of running Whole Foods when it got big wasn't this fun. It's got very bureaucratic. You're always dealing with people suing you and lawyers and government regulators. And yeah, I'm back in startup mode as an entrepreneur and having a lot of fun again. That's the Love.Life story.
Well, that was really excellent. I think we all really loved hearing about that and inspired to be more healthy, right? It's a practice. You keep working on it. So
if you want to know more about Love.Life, just do a search on Love.Life, not love.life.com, just Love.Life. And you'll see our website and you'll see what we're up to.
Excellent. So I want to give plenty of time here for our Q&A session, with the group, because I'm sure there's folks who would love to ask you some things. Let me just ask if there's anything else you'd like to add here before we go to the questions.
No, just love everyone all the time, no exceptions.
Okay. Love thy neighbor as thyself.
Yes, exactly. Well, love your neighbor better than you love yourself. Some people hate themselves.
I like that. It's good. All right. So let's open it up to questions. If you have a question, click the little react button down at the bottom and just try to keep it concise so we can get to as many folks as possible. And we'll start with John Cole. John, go for it.
Thank you very much, John Mackey. I certainly resonate with a lot of the things that you said. I'm familiar from the negotiations literature that win-win, of course, is an important concept. That's oftentimes how you get beyond conflicts. It sounded like from what you and Steve mentioned that there was added value to adding the third win-win-win versus win-win. But when you explained it, I didn't see that added value. If there's an additional concept that you're trying to, and I'll watch the TED video, but an additional concept to mentioning win 3 times rather than the more typical 2 times.
Well, I'll give you an example of why win-win by itself is not enough. Let's say that you hire a contract killer to murder your wife. That'd be a win for the contract killer. They're getting paid a lot of money. You're trying to get rid of your wife for whatever reasons. You'd see that as a win. It's not really good for your wife though. And it's not really good for the larger community, right? If we're going to have, contract killings going on. So I think the third win is we look for the interrelationships that go beyond just the transaction between you and me, that we have ripple effects pretty much for almost everything we do. And so being more conscious of that and then asking that question, how can this be good for the larger community that we're all part of? Is it good for the larger family that we're consisting of? So it's reaching out and thinking about is it good for the world? Is it good for the environment? Is it good for animals? I mean, we're completely interconnected in every way. So it's just asking and being conscious of the impacts it's going to have on larger communities and looking for wins for them if possible as well.
Yeah, that's great. Wins for the parts and win for the whole.
Yes.
All right, John and then Steve. You are muted.
This John, a lot of Johns out there. Okay, thank you.
Story of our lives, right?
Yeah, right. The most common repeated phrase in the English language is you're on mute. First of all, I totally agree with you're saying, and I had awakening experience with psychedelics. I think I counted up. I spent over 2,000 plus nights in the wilderness of my life, sleeping under
Wow.
the stars. Very, very impactful. But two things have happened to me, and I work with Roger Walsh, and he's very influenced by the Course in Miracles,
Oh,
and
I
so
love Roger.
yeah, I have this amazing privileged life. I just have these great friends. I live in a great place. I have enough money to do whatever I want. Just a great wife, beautiful dog, all the stuff. But a couple of things have happened lately. A woman that works for us got arrested from her mobile home, and her son was there. He'd busted parole, and the police came in, and he had methamphetamines and paraphernalia, and she got sent to jail. So she got out, and I went with her to court twice for the arraignments. And this was in a rural parish in Louisiana, and I just sat there with these people, this underclass, drugs and drugs and drugs and poverty, and there's this lower class that somehow didn't benefit from our great system, and it just it breaks my heart. I was really, really moved. And the second thing is, I had on my podcast on Monday, we we talked with a couple of our friends from Ukraine. Okay, and it's a 4-year anniversary since the Russia declared all-out war. And if they don't keep fighting, it's their existential existence is gone. They're gone. Their people's gone. Their nation's gone. And so, how do we look at those two kind of extremes, and how do what we're saying here? How do we make this capitalism work for this underclass? And how do we love everybody to these Ukrainians who are fighting for their very existence, and their people are getting slaughtered for they didn't do anything. They just wanted to be a free country. So,
Obviously that's a really good question, or good questions. One of the things that I learned from the Economist, and I think one of the great living intellectuals still alive, is Thomas Sowell. I don't know if any of you have read his work. I've read much of his work. And in these type situations, one of the things Sowell always does that I've started to adopt is the first question he asks is, compared to what? Compared to what? So, do we have problems in the world today? Absolutely. We have tons of problems. But if you looked at what they were 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 200 years ago, it's better off overall for humanity. And one of the things I like to do is I often ask people, I'll give you any time in the history of the human race to be alive. When has it been better than right now? With all the problems that we still have, all the wars, there's less wars going on now than there used to be. There's less poverty today than there used to be. And if you go back, the most astounding thing, if you go back 250 years ago, 94% of everyone alive on the planet lived on less than $2 a day. 94%. The average lifespan was, on 85% lived on less than $1 a day. The average lifespan was 30. The most women, there was no modern dentistry. There were no antibiotics. There were no vaccines. So many women died in childbirth. We had slavery in the United States, and slavery was much common throughout the whole world. Yes, we have a lot of problems, but compared to what? We have to always see our problems in the context that we've made a lot of progress. And by the way, we've made a lot of progress in our lifetimes. The world is much better off today than it was 50 years ago. In almost every objective way, it has improved. So I always want to encourage people to read some books so they educate themselves better. Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now, is a great book. Matt Ridley's book, The Rational Optimist, is a great book. A book that's more recent, Superabundance by Marion Tuppy, is and Gail Poole is an incredible book. So yes, we have these problems, and I'm solving the problems as best I can that I feel called to work on. I can't solve every problem in the world, but you should try to work on the ones that you feel drawn, that capture your. We should all be in service. Service is a good thing, and so we in service in the areas that we think we can make a contribution. But I don't worry too much about things that I can't do anything about, or that I'm not called to do. Otherwise, you spend all your time lamenting one of the best things we can do in the world is to be caring and loving and joyful, because that helps other people to be happier and healthier. And that's how we're going to heal the planet. We won't heal the planet by feeling guilty and being bummed out all the time and unhappy. That spreads that energy throughout the world. So I'm not trying to be Pollyannish. These are real problems. And guess what? Whenever I talk to young people, I talk to universities all the time. And one of the things I always like to say is, hey, my generation solved some problems, created some new problems. Hey, you're up next. It's your generation's time to solve some problems. So get on with it. Stop expecting me to solve all the world's problems. I can't solve them all. I've done a lot of good in the world. I'm happy and proud of what I've contributed, but I'm not ultimately responsible for everybody else. I'm only responsible for how I show up in the world and how I interact with everybody that I encounter, and how I live and what I do with my blessings and how I share them. So I just know that being loving and kind and compassionate and helping people is a good thing. And I can't answer. I don't have all the solutions to all the world's problems. And perhaps they never will be. Human beings, human nature, unless it is to evolve. And unless we change and evolve our consciousness, then we're going to continue to have these type of problems. But I will say, John, trust me, if you do this research, you will see that we're better off today. There's an underclass in America. It's just a lot smaller than it used to be. It used to be so much bigger. Oh, illiteracy rates 250 years ago, 88% of the people on the planet couldn't read. Think about that, 88%. Now that's reversed. Only about 12% of the planet can't read. The planet is awakening. The planet is developing. It is progressing. And we all need to do our part to do what we can. I don't have a solution to the Russian Ukraine war. And so, sorry, I don't have a solution for that. But I believe that in the collective intelligence of humanity, there is a solution, and that it can be figured out. I mean, for one thing, Putin will eventually die. And it's just, sometimes humanity progresses at one funeral at a time. So, yeah, I'm sorry I can't be of more help on that one. And you're moved by it. So, yeah, there you have it. Sorry.
True. All right, Steve and then Jackson.
Thanks, Rigel. Hello, John. Thank you. Thanks for getting into that earlier. Okay. I've been reading more of the people emphasizing the importance of resistance and fighting back against authoritarianism. And I was trying to resolve that with the Beatles, "All You Need Is Love," and love, love, love. So could you go into that a little bit more?
I think loving is the best resistance. I think attacking people, even, attacking the other side, I don't think brings happiness. I don't think it brings peace. I think it perpetuates the problem. So I sometimes play a game, and the game goes something like this. Am I going to have this person who's obviously very angry? Is this person going to take my energy down, or can I lift his or her energy up? That's the game I play. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. But I to the best of my abilities, I don't let them take me down. Sometimes we just have to agree to separate, because I'm unable to lift them up, and it's not pleasant for them to be around.
I feel like there must be some historical examples we can point to where, things that more or less appeared as fighting were justified. I mean, in any war, like in the case of a war between countries, like one country doesn't just say, "Oh, violence is bad, we're not going to fight back."
Well, peace starts inside ourselves. And if you think you can get peace by fighting the people that you think are bad guys, I think you might discover you won't get peace that way. So I am preaching. Yeah, I'm preaching peace, and I'm trying to be peaceful. Now, that doesn't mean that you condone bad things that are happening. It doesn't mean that you can't, so to speak, resist. But I'm going to argue that you need to resist with love and with inner peace. And that, yes, you have to stop bad things from happening to the best of your ability. But it's what our consciousness we do it with. Are we going to do that full of hate? and feel so self-righteous, justified, because these people are evil. And by God, I want to punish them. They're so evil. And it's like, you don't understand. You've now shifted into the very hate that you're trying to resist. You've become it. So the question for me to you is, can you resist while maintaining your equanimity, your own peace, your own love, your own open, caring heart? That's the challenge I'll put to you.
And I think Steve or Rigel, I can't remember, someone earlier mentioned just in the approach, say, with Russia, like, you don't have to focus on the authoritarian leader, Putin. You can focus on the Russian people and, shifting your attention in that way.
Because the Russian people are like people everywhere. They love their children, and they're stuck in a bad situation. Probably, I think 1 million Russians have been killed or something like that. I'm pretty sure a lot of mothers lost their sons and daughters, and they're not very happy.
Yeah. All right. I want to make sure we get everyone here that we can. All right. Jackson and then Pablo.
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on conscious capitalism and the rise of socialism in the United States today, because I kind of see that as a response to the negative aspects of capitalism. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on conscious capitalism sort of becoming the dominant mode of capitalism over the negative aspects that are having this response.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I'm a longtime student of socialism. I've read so many books on socialism. When I was younger, I was in the co-op movement. Food for people, not for profit. My postmodern green phase was very, very green, very, very idealistic. And the reality about socialism is it just simply doesn't work. It's been 41 countries tried socialism in the last 100 years, and all of them failed. But what happens is a new generation comes along and they just say it hasn't been done right yet. We had the wrong people doing it. In fact, one of the books I read that I really like, I recommend you take a look at it. It's called Heaven on Earth. And it traces sort of even going back to the French Revolution and then Robert Owen's commune and it traces this utopian impulse that seems to rise in every generation that looks around. We're born, we come of age, we look around and we say, shit, there's a lot of things wrong with this world. Look at all these people that are poor. Look at all the suffering. And we're outraged by it. And we think there's got to be a better solution. And so socialism it's like I call it a zombie. No matter how many times it fails, no matter how many times you think it's killed off, it comes back with a new generation that can believe that they're different. They'll do it right this time. We will create a world where there's no pain, no suffering, no inequality. Everybody has enough money to live on. And it ends up involving authoritarianism by intrinsic nature. You're forcing people, you're at gunpoint ultimately to do what you tell them to do. And that attracts always the wrong people. The people that are power mad end up the Stalins end up running things, or, all these people reveal themselves over time. And the well-intentioned intellectuals, you might say, they either become that themselves or they get liquidated and the real power mad people come in and take control of it. So if socialism would work, I'd have more, I'd be more willing to talk about it. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Capitalism actually works. So conscious capitalism is just doing capitalism, knowing it works, but doing it more consciously, with more love, with more care, understanding the interdependencies, caring about the environment, caring about all the stakeholders. That can work. Socialism, I don't care what generation does it, it's never going to work. And don't tell me the Nordic states are socialistic, because they're not. If you look at go Google Economic Freedom Index, you will see that Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Finland, all of them have a higher degree of economic freedom now than the United States has. Sweden has a universal voucher system. They have no inheritance taxes in Sweden, zero. There's no death taxes in Sweden. So people have this, they have big social welfare states. That might be something the United States could do if we weren't going bankrupt as it was right now. But anyway, socialism doesn't work. And that's why we should reject it, because it's not caring, it's not compassionate. It ultimately it's trickle down poverty to the whole society. Venezuela is a great recent example of it. It was the richest country in South America, and now it's the poorest. And millions of people are fleeing there because it's such a totalitarian disaster.
Yeah.
That's how I feel.
All right, Pablo, then Barbara.
Okay, thanks. So this is just a small comment, and is that I don't know, John, if you know, but well, first of all, I am from Colombia, and we have here like a social security enterprise that nowadays is huge, huge. Like nowadays you can go to theater and pay like just $5 and have like a superior experience, and it's like available for so many people here in Colombia, especially in Antioquia. So they recently like included in their pillars conscious capitalism, and yeah, same thing happened here. Very kind of led people were complaining that this enterprise is just increasing, but also like deterring what really like led values really mean. So if you didn't know that, well, I just wanted to add that.
Okay, thank you. Conscious capitalism's really got a following. We got lots of chapters and whatnot, and down in South America, particularly in Brazil. Brazil's a huge, huge conscious capitalism movement there.
Oh, interesting. All right, Barbara, and then Juanita.
John, when you mentioned all of your philanthropic efforts, particularly the ones in abject poverty abroad, one of the things that always pops into mind when I hear that from retailers that sell to very high-end folks is that none of my neighbors can afford Whole Foods. In fact, I will tell you honestly that they buy their food at dollar stores.
Mm-hmm.
If you can call that food. It's really bad. And I'm wondering, so we're taking huge profits out of very pricey products. Maybe we should find ways of reducing some of those prices. Do you think that's even practical?
Yeah, well,
to allow more people access?
I would say a few things. First of all, I'd say your data is way out of date, because one of the wins for Whole Foods and why we made that Amazon transaction, Whole Foods prices have come way down. And I was talking to my successor, Jason Beekle, just about a month ago, and I asked him, how's the price comparison go? We measure our prices against all of our competitors. So for example, our prices now on the exact same items, like compared to Wegmans, we're slightly cheaper. We're about 99 percentile with them. We're 96 percentile, less expensive than Publix in Florida. We're not as inexpensive as H-E-B is in Texas, but they're our toughest competitor. But all through the United States, our prices have become far more competitive. Trader Joe's, we match all Trader Joe's private label prices or cheaper. So I'd say the whole paycheck narrative needs to be updated. Most people don't actually, they just hold on to their previous conceptions. So I'd say if you want to do a really good price comparison, you'd be surprised. But I'll also just say that what I said before, no one's forced to trade with Whole Foods Market. We sell the highest quality food available. And if you're gonna have the highest quality, it's going to be more expensive. That's what quality oftentimes means. And so nobody has to trade at Whole Foods. If they think it's unfair or the prices are too high, then they don't shop there. And in reality, only about, Whole Foods has about a 3% market share of groceries in the United States. So 97% of the people are buying groceries somewhere else. But that 3% has made Whole Foods Market, it's doing like $25 or $26 billion a year in sales. So it is a niche market that we carved out to be the highest quality, to sell natural and organic foods. Most of the foods people buy are processed junk foods that are cheaper, but in terms of cost per nourishment instead of cost per calorie, they're not very inexpensive because
I would agree with that, John.
yeah. So
many of your products.
I always, my entire adult life at Whole Foods, you have to understand. So we've been criticized for being expensive, and so I'm a little bit immune to it now. And as I always like to say, of course, it's not my problem any longer. But shopping in Whole Foods or anywhere else is voluntary. If you don't think it's a good deal and you don't like it, then you don't shop there. And that's that. But you don't have to. That's the great thing about America. You might have, if you live in New York City and they outlaw all privately owned grocery stores, and we just have the government grocery stores, you can have the warm embrace of collectivism and just find out what it's like to not have the private enterprise doing your groceries. So anyway, that's my answer to that.
All right, thanks. All right, Juanita, and if you can make it quick, we can get to one more. But then we have to wrap up. Go for it, Juanita.
I am very interested right now on what is the relationship in terms of beliefs and values that we have as a humanity with money. Especially coming from a country like Colombia, which is basically very religious, and that shapes the way you connect or you relate to money. So my question is, you said that we have been culturally trained to think in terms of win-lose.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think our economic systems reflect like a deeper psychological belief in scarcity? And how can we really shift towards those win-win models without transforming first our collective relationship with money?
Well, I think they go simultaneously. I think that the transformation occurs as a culture as a society becomes more prosperous. It usually takes decades. I mean, I want you to just consider a couple of countries. The economic progress that two countries have made in the last 50 years is sort of unprecedented in the history of humanity. Look how far China and India have come in 50 years. These are the two most populated countries in the world. They were so poor 50 years ago. They're just so poor. And then as they embraced more economic freedom, they began to become prosperous. Now, the interesting thing about China is that you've got still got authoritarian rule. The entrepreneurs are starting to be re-educated or they're getting the hell out of the country. So whether China will maintain its prosperity going forward is an open question because they're moving away from economic freedom. India, on the other hand, is embracing more economic freedom, and they're beginning to escape from abject poverty. So it used to be that we saw that we had the West was prosperous and the rest of the world was poor, and so the West was seen as the oppressor. But that's no longer the narrative, right? I mean, so many other countries around the world have become prosperous as they've embraced more economic freedom. Colombia happens to be one of those. South America is rapidly progressing. They're in Asia. Think about where you just compare South Korea to North Korea, or you used to be able to compare Taiwan to mainstream China, but now as mainstream China has more economic freedom, they become much more prosperous. But still, a shadow of what they could be if they were to embrace more economic freedom. So I just believe economic freedom is how humanity escapes from poverty. And so the more economic freedom we have, the more we begin to move away from poverty. Now, you're still it doesn't mean that whole country is going to eventually, there'll be no poverty because people can still make bad choices in their lives, or some people just have horrible life conditions that make it almost impossible for them to individually to escape. And there's always going to be a place for us, a safety net for taking care of our poorest people that are unable to help themselves and can't help themselves. I think that's an ethical obligation of society to do so. And it's an ethical obligation of each of us as individuals to share our own prosperity and bounty with other people, and to do what we can to help. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, John. We're at time now. You all had such great questions, but we got to wrap it up. One quick announcement: next month's meeting is Wednesday, March 11th, with Robert Nicastro from the Center for Christogenesis. That's Ilia Delio's organization. So come back for that, and let's give a warm thank you
Thanks,
for
John.
John
Appreciate
Mackey,
you so
thank you
much.
for Whole Foods, man.
Yeah.
Let me.
Thank you, John. That
thank
was
you.
Thank
fascinating.
you. Love
John.
you.
Let me give my final word to the group
Sure.
here.
Sure.
I wish all of you great happiness, good health, and much love in your life. Forgive everyone and everything you encounter. Spread love, and that our human species will continue to awaken to our ultimate destiny. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, John.
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you, Rigel. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Organic
That was
food,
really
man.
awesome.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Great.
Bye,
All
everyone.
right.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care, y'all.